Shekinah, thank you so much for joining me on Misunderstood. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So I've been catching up on your show. I find you fascinating, and I have a zillion questions for you. So I'm going to jump right into them. Okay.
Okay, let's go.
So are you originally from LA, or is that just where you kind of resided when this whole thing started?
I grew up in Tennessee until I was 16 years old, and then my family moved to Montana so that my sister and I could go to a wilderness survival boarding school. And then I moved to Los Angeles about 14 years ago.
Wait, what wilderness survey? Tell me about that for a second. What was that all about?
My parents raised us very conservative. We were raised in Tennessee in the Amish lifestyle. When we moved to Montana, they wanted to kind of preserve that very like pure, wholesome, off the grid type of life. But they were taking a little bit of a departure from the Amish lifestyle, but still keeping certain elements of it. So they enrolled us in this really primitive wilderness survival boarding school.
How long were you there?
I was there for about a year. I got expelled for having a boyfriend. It was definitely against the rules to have a boyfriend. I don't know if you saw in the show, but I had a 143-page love letter from a boyfriend. It was that boyfriend. So we
Oh, it
weren't
was
allowed
that
to
person.
really, yeah, we weren't allowed to really talk in person, and they really kept us separated. So we only had our letter writing really to communicate.
Wow.
So yeah, so we would hide our letters under rocks in the woods, and it was, yeah, it was
I mean, that's
so
kind of
weird, but
romantic. I got to be honest with you.
yeah.
I was born in Anchorage, Alaska, and I moved to New
Mhm.
York City when I was 5. And my mother sent me to one of those types of boarding schools in Running Springs, California. I was
Wow.
there and graduate. I went from when I was 13 to almost 17. I graduated from the
Wow.
program, but it was a wilderness program like that where
Oh
it
my
was, I
gosh.
mean, it was really hard. And I know what you mean. You're not allowed to have relationships there,
No.
get in a lot of trouble.
Yes.
And so, and it's so funny because I didn't actually put two and two together. What I'm curious about that long letter that he wrote you. Was it starting and stopping? Like, was it, I wrote this on Monday, then Tuesday? Was he writing you a letter every day for 140 whatever days, or it was one consecutive letter?
That's a good question. I wish I could ask him that because, there's not like multiple dates in the letter. It just like has one date on it, but I would think that it took him several days to write that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Do you still communicate with him?
No, he's married, and I haven't seen him in I think like 26 years, 24 years.
I'm curious if he watched the episode and knows that it's his letter
You
that
know what? I follow some of his sisters on Instagram, and I sent a DM to one of them after that episode aired. And I said, I wonder if your brother knows that the letter that you wrote was just on TV. And
did she respond?
she was like, oh my God, let me ask him. I know he doesn't really watch much TV. And I don't know if she ended up asking him, but I just thought it would be so funny if he found that out.
Right. Oh my God. Well, maybe his wife didn't think it was funny. So,
Yeah, exactly.
so they didn't want to get into it. Okay. All right. So your past is really interesting to me. All right. I want to find out tell me about how you got yourself to Turkey. I know that you met your current partner, who you're on the show with, Semper, from being in Turkey and meeting on a dating app when you were there. Am I correct about
Yes.
that?
Yes, that's
So
right.
were you just visiting Turkey for a few weeks, days? Tell me what happened.
My best friend at the time was actually transitioning male to female and wanted a hair transplant surgery. And she was planning to go to Turkey alone. And I just didn't feel good about it. And I said, let me go with you. I'll book a flight. I'll help take care of you. I'd never been to Turkey before. I never thought of going to Turkey before. And so I did. I went with her. I just didn't realize that we were going to be in the hotel room after her surgery for like a good week. And it was
Mhm.
so boring. I was just trapped in this hotel room. She couldn't do anything. And I wasn't seeing the city. And so I was like, I didn't know anyone there. So I thought, let me download a dating app and maybe go on a date, and somebody local can show me some of the hot
Correct.
spots around the city. So I matched with Sarper right away. But unfortunately, it was towards the end of my trip. So we went on a date, and it was amazing.
Mhm.
And we planned to see each other again the next night. And so we did. And then the following morning, I flew out. So we only had this very short, amount of time together, those two dates. but we stayed in touch. And then I flew back to Turkey a month, I think it was like a little over a month later to spend a week with him.
So at what point did you guys contact the show? Like, how did we come to have you in our lives?
So I'm an esthetician in Los Angeles, and being here in LA, I do have a lot of industry people that are clients of mine. And one of my clients was a casting director, and she's a producer actually, and she was having a facial, and I was telling her about Sarper, and she was saying, "Oh my God, this is so 90 Day Fiance. If I were you, you need to submit for the show. If I was in casting, I would definitely cast you guys." And it just planted the seed. So later I like Google searched how to submit for the show, and there was an email address. So I just sent an email. I think there was like a paragraph that I wrote about how I met Sarper and that we were still communicating, but we'd only had 2 dates. Um, but on the first date, we'd taken a photo together. So I included that photo, and we went through the casting process, and we got cast very quickly. So
Oh my
before
gosh.
you know it, we were getting to know each other on camera.
Right. Okay. So that's what my next question was. So in between the getting cast on the show and the reality of where your relationship was, can you explain to our listeners where you guys were listening? How long, I mean, living, how long were you actually dating at that point, and what were your feelings for each other at that point?
So when we started filming, we had only spent a week together, and, those 2 dates, which were only, a few hours each. So we hadn't spent very much time together. We'd been texting a little bit, through WhatsApp, but Sarper really wanted to keep all of the, more important questions for in person. So we couldn't uncover a lot of deeper issues over that length of time. So we had to attack them right away when we were finally in person. And I mean, you saw that happen on camera
Right.
because, I needed to tell him I'm not going to date a guy that's not going to show on social media that he's with someone, especially someone with his background. So,
Right.
some of those bigger things came out sooner than they probably would in normal relationships. But when you're long distance, the dynamic is kind of different,
Yeah.
you do have to talk about those things earlier.
So what initially attracted you to him that made you think, oh, this is kind of fun. I will stop dating anyone else I'm thinking of dating, and I will actually go on a show with this guy?
Yeah, well, it was mainly on our first date. When we agreed to meet up that night, he sent me a list of things to think of before I left. He said, send a photo of my passport to 2 of your friends. Make sure your phone is fully charged. He was just so overly kind of protective and making sure I was doing this in a safe way, because he was like, this is kind of crazy. Like, you don't live in Turkey. You're meeting with a Turkish guy you've never met before. I think he was afraid that if it would have been somebody else, I could have been in a bad situation. And he wanted to make sure I
That's
felt
true.
really safe. So that impressed me a lot. And he was such a gentleman on the date. I mean, my credit card wasn't working with the taxi. It was such an ordeal. And he swooped in and helped me out. And he was just so sweet and charming, very charming. I mean, I could tell right away he was definitely a little bit of a player. I was like, this is not, he does this all the time. He literally goes on
Right.
dates all the time and says these things and does these things all the time. But I mean, I knew what I was getting into, and I felt like there was the special connection that we had, which made me want to keep talking to him.
Right.